Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We are going to be talking about Webinar 101, Driving Leads and Revenue for Your Business. Who am I? So it's so nice to meet you all. My name is Devin Heavey. I am an associate CSM at New Perspective. When I'm not working, you can find me taking walks on the beach with my dogs, or in pre-COVID times, going up to any cute dog on the street and asking permission to pet them. Now, before I dive into webinars, I want to give a quick overview of who New Perspective is. New Perspective is your strategic marketing partner and agency that cares about growing your business. With 15 years of experience, numerous partners, and certifications, New Perspective brings the value of a dedicated partner to help achieve your business goals. Before I get started today, I'm curious to know where you all stand. So if you want to put in the chat box, what's your demand gen strategy? So let me know in the chat. I'm going to talk about a couple of demand gen strategies as well. You guys put your answers in there. So demand gen is really just a strategy that you use to generate new leads for your business. I can see the chat box below enough already, so thank you guys all for your participation. I see email campaigns, social campaigns, sales rep blitzes. These are all great strategies, and I see a couple of webinar strategies already in there. And I'm so excited to talk to you about the specific demand gen strategy, which is webinars. Today, here is our agenda. We're going to prepare for success, talk about integrating promotion strategies, unique webinar day activities, alignment with internal teams, exclusive post-webinar experiences, and then we're going to get to answering your top questions at the end. So I know I just asked you about your demand gen strategy, and some of you guys put in the chat that webinars was part of your strategy. So I want to know, how well do you know webinars? Rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being I don't know anything, and 5 is I'm a webinar master, so challenge me with teaching me something new. So put your answers in the chat box. All right, I can see them coming in, a couple of 2s, 3s, 4s. So it looks like we have a very good mix, which is exciting. I can't wait to teach you guys about this. So let's cover why webinars are important. The first thing is they establish yourself and your business as an industry expert, which is so important because there are so many businesses, no matter what industry you're in, so you really need to stand out. They also generate new leads for your business. They help prospects along the funnel that your sales rep might have just started talking to or has been talking to for a while but hasn't gotten any progress. They also help you with clients. They allow you to invite clients to webinar and upsell them at the end of that webinar. They also strengthen that relationship with your current clients. Your current clients should know that they are working with a company that's an expert, and these webinars really help do that. We're going to go into webinar preparation. So what you need to do for a successful webinar. The first thing you guys need to consider is topic, speakers, timeline, graphics, budget, company, and technology. So I'm going to go into all of that today, but I briefly want to hit on technology because it is very important to have a successful webinar. You cannot have a successful webinar if you don't have a successful technology and a reliable technology. So you want to make sure that you are making the investment into a good webinar software. Our two favorites are Zoom and GoToWebinar. They're really easy to use. They have a great user experience from an attendee point of view, and they are really have a wide range of budgets. So it allows you to purchase the best option for your company. Now we're going to go into topic consideration. So this is obviously the first thing you want to do when you're building a webinar, but you really want to think about strategically how your topic is useful for the people that you are wanting to attend your webinar. So the first thing is anything trending right now? Should something that's out in the world be discussed? I know that when COVID-19 hit in March, pivot was a big buzzword. So a lot of people did webinars surrounding a pivot to this virtual home life. You can see I'm in my home right now, I'm not in an office. So we pivoted, and webinars are, teaching you how to pivot. Are there any verticals that are struggling right now? That's something that you should be looking into. Maybe your best strategy is targeting a vertical that needs a little extra help right now and that needs a little guidance. You also want to be aware of when's not a good time to target a vertical. So let's take healthcare, for example. Healthcare during COVID-19 at the very start was in full pandemic panic mode, like we all were. But healthcare had people rushing to them if they were sick and people not wanting anything to do with them if they were healthy. So healthcare at the beginning of March, April, even going to May, was in this bubble where they couldn't hear any new information. They were focused on the problem at hand, solving it, the task at hand. Now, if you go out a couple of months, go into August, where things seem to level out a little bit, you're getting a better handle on what to expect with COVID-19, then healthcare was open to hearing from feedback or other ways to market their centers. Because like I said at the beginning, healthcare either had people rushing to them if they were sick or staying away because they associated healthcare with being sick. But people still need doctor's appointments, right? They still needed to know that their doctors were there for them. So as a healthcare organizations, they had to figure out this new plan to tell patients, here's actually our new plan on keeping you guys safe. And this is when I hosted a webinar back in August surrounding healthcare and re-entry into the marketing world with healthcare. So the main points of that webinar talked about safety, how you let your patients know about that. It talked about other alternative options for visits to doctors if you weren't feeling safe enough to go into a hospital or even a doctor center. So those are things that, I was aware of the timeline. I wouldn't have hosted that webinar back in March, April, or even May. I hosted in August because things had, like I said, leveled out a little bit. Obviously, we're still dealing with this pandemic and it's still very real, but people in the healthcare center were open to hearing from others at that point in August. You also want to look into what are current prospects struggling with? Is there a product that's really confusing to them? Maybe they don't understand social media and the impact of it. You want to keep those things in mind when thinking about a topic. And how you do that really easily is talking to your sales reps. They're on the front line with people, talking to them every day. So you want to hear from them directly. Hey guys, what are you thinking about when you're calling these prospects? What are they telling you? What are the challenges that you guys are facing? And build your webinar around that. Now you want to talk about the right speakers. In a webinar, if you have the capacity, you want to have at least 2 speakers. You'll notice today that I am the only speaker because we're working in a small team. So you can adjust this based on your team capacity size, but ideally you would like to have 2 speakers that can bounce off each other and a webinar host that will be able to make sure all the technical side is going great. So I have Kate, who's running the technical aspect for me. And, we want to make sure that the speakers are focused on presenting, not focused on the technical aspects. You want to have speakers that are industry experts and that are comfortable thinking on their feet. People are going to ask questions like in webinars, and you want to make sure that those speakers are able to answer those questions. Or if they're not able to answer those questions, they can say, I'm not sure about that answer, but let me get back to you. You want to have people who are good at interacting with others. You notice how I'm interacting with you guys. I'm using my hands talking. I'm looking at the chat box to see if you all have any questions. You want to have speakers who are comfortable with that. And they also, that requires a level of confidence in your presenters. So don't just choose any old speaker, really dive into how the speaker is going to be a good fit for the webinar that you're hosting. Now here's our ideal timeline for hosting a webinar. I say ideal because as any of us know that work in marketing, sometimes ideal is just not an option. But if it was, and if you do have the chance to have an ideal timeline, you want to start 6 weeks out. 6 weeks is when you start your webinar topic, you finalize that topic, you finalize your title, you start rolling it out to your stakeholders. At 5 weeks, you roll it out to your sales team, make sure they're involved. At 4 weeks is the magic point where you want to start advertising and promoting your webinar. So that's going to last for 4 weeks. Throughout those 4 weeks, you'll be sending emails, social posts, and you'll be creating your webinar deck behind the scenes. Then a day out, you want to make sure that you're sending your last email blitz, you're sending reminder emails your day of, and then after the webinar, there's much more than one day, but just put one day on here in terms of graphics. You want to make sure those day after emails are being sent out. Make sure that your webinar is being uploaded to a gated landing page. And then the sales blitz begins the day after the webinar. With so many webinars out there, you want to make sure that you're grabbing people's attention. People will only attend a webinar one time throughout a week. There are more than one webinar per week out there, no matter what industry you're in. So it's really important to grab people's attention with your title and with your design. Your title needs to communicate what people are going to learn in your webinar. It's not best practice to do a really fluffy title. Even though it sounds fun and good, if people don't know what they're going to be learning during that webinar, then they're really not going to sign up. So you can make it cute, but make sure that they're going to understand what they're learning about. For the design, you want to make sure that you have brand alignment. They should be able to click away from your ad and go to a landing page that looks similar and go to a website that looks similar. You want to make sure that your brand is aligned across all of those. You also don't want to make it too busy. Really make that CTA clear on those ads because you want people to sign up. So communicate to them how they register and how they sign up for the webinar. In order to get the most out of a webinar and to incorporate new leads, you do need a budget. So that budget, it doesn't have to be overtly large. You can definitely, have a smaller budget and still have a successful webinar. The number one thing that your budget should go to, if you don't have it, is a webinar platform like Zoom or GoToWebinar. If you have the webinar platform, great. Now the whole budget can go to ads. I recommend LinkedIn or Facebook for social ads. I think these are the best two social platforms when you're discussing webinars and getting really qualified leads. You want to make sure that you are setting the demographics for those ads to be your target audience, because although we'll have some people joining who just want to hear from you, you want to make sure that the people who join your webinar are valuable to your company and are good fits for your company. So I have another question for you guys, and that's, how do you currently let your company know about upcoming webinars? Or do you not really let them know at all? So go ahead and answer in the chat and give you a little bit of time. I see some answers rolling in. So I don't currently update my company, or I send it out in a weekly newsletter to my company. Okay, post it in Slack channels, got it. So those are great, but you do want to make sure that you have a plan for rolling this out to your company. Your company is an asset for you on these webinars. Your sales reps, your team, they're an asset. So you want to make sure you treat them like that by rolling it out to them properly. So the first thing you want to do is you want to roll it out to your stakeholders. These are the people who really have invested in this webinar and absolutely care about the results. So you want to make sure you're having a kickoff meeting with them and discussing goals. Each webinar you create should have a goal at the end of it. Goal for attendees, a goal for RSVPs, a revenue goal, whatever type of goal that you can measure, you should create that. And make sure that's aligned with your stakeholders and you guys are on the same page. You also want to make sure you're getting your sales team involved. Your sales team's a huge, huge ally for you. So you want to set a kickoff meeting for them and be an ally back to them. How you can do this is you want to give them the breakdown of the webinar. You want to tell them what the webinar is about, why you guys decide to host the webinar, who you are targeting with this webinar, when the webinar is, and where the webinar is. So give them the link to the landing page, let them know which platform it's on. Then you also kind of want to create an overview document for your sales team. This overview document should contain everything that your sales team needs in order to successfully promote this webinar to their prospects. So you want to include links to landing pages, links to social copy, example email copy for them to use, graphics for them to use. And you also want to set expectations with them. So it's great to have conversations, say, I would love it if you guys can get one person registered for this webinar. So set expectations, get them involved, work with them. Let's get into promotion. So these are going to be different ways to promote your webinar to drive registrants. The first thing you need to know is you need to create a cross-channel promotion strategy. So what that means is you can't just focus on one platform to handle all of your webinar registrants. So you can't just focus on only sending out emails and then expect to have this large number of registrants. You have to hit people with emails, paid social, organic social, website, blog posts, email signatures, and sales participation. So before I dive into this cross promotion strategy, how many emails do you all get during the day? In just one day. All right, I'm seeing 100, 250, too many to count. Okay, so a lot of answers are rolling in right now, and the general gist is way too many to care about all of them. And that is the general gist that you should have when going into creating an email for your webinar. You want to create an email that people are going to open and that people are going to care about once they open. So a way to do this is to segment your list. 4 great buckets to segment your list is unengaged prospects, engaged prospects, upsell clients, and onboarding clients. Each email to these people is going to be a little bit different because they have a different personality and they're at different stages with the company. So make sure to alter your copy to fit these buckets. You also want to have an exciting and informative copy. Put your subject line, test out, do some A/B testing your subject line because you want people opening your emails. And after they open it, you want them to get excited about what they're going to learn about. Nobody wants to attend something that they think is going to be boring or non-educational for them. So make your copy excited and informative. Have a clear CTA. When people open your emails, sometimes they only realistically have a second to glance over it. So make that CTA large and in charge of your email. Make it really easy for them to click on that, register, and get the confirmation email. Personalization is a great tool to use, and including a personalized token in your subject line, so like a first name, is a great way to grasp people's attention. One note of caution here is that if your database isn't clean, don't use that personalization token. It's better to not have a personalization token than to have a token that says lady with white shirt as the first name. So you want to make sure that database is clean. You should be sending 4 emails with your webinar promotion. Email 1 should go out 4 weeks prior to the webinar. This email should be the longest because you're really explaining to your audience what the webinar is and they've never heard of it before. So you want to give a clear definition of what they're going to be learning and what the webinar is going to be about. Email 2, 2.5 weeks prior, give a little stat about what you're going to be talking about and grab their attention again. Email 3 is 1 week prior. The majority of people who sign up for webinars sign up in a 7-day period. So email 3 is really important, and to significantly impact that email, you want to create a little countdown clock at the top of your email so people know exactly when your webinar is going to happen. And email 4 is the day before. This email usually gets the most traction because it's most relevant on people's minds. So make sure you send out that email for the day before your webinar. The reminder process is equally as important as sending out your emails. You need to make it easy for people to remember when your webinar is and where they go to attend your webinar. The average show rate for a webinar is 1/3 of people who register. So you need to make sure that you're in constant communication with your registrants to have them remember your webinar People are busy, so just make it really simple for them. You can do this by sending 3 reminder emails. Reminder 1 is the confirmation email. This should come right after you register for a webinar. Reminder number 2 is the day before email. Include a 15-second sneak peek of your webinar with one of your presenters. It can be as simple as having a presenter come on and say, "Hi, I am really excited that you registered for my title of the webinar tomorrow, and I'm going to be talking about ABCD. Can't wait to see you there." Reminder 3, this should be an hour before the webinar. Because like I said, people get busy, days fly by, so you want to make sure that you're sending them another reminder an hour before, and include the unique link for the webinar that people need to click on and join in this email. Now we're going to be talking about social media and how you can use social media to promote your webinar. So some of the best practices for paid social is focusing on LinkedIn and Facebook for your social ads. You want to make sure that the graphics have the date and time on the image. You want to keep the copy simple, and you want to set the right target audience. You can have the most incredibly beautiful graphic, and it has the date and time, it has simple copy, people know what they're talking about, but if that ad isn't directed to the right audience, it won't serve you well. So make sure that you're setting up the right audience. Also, since paid social ads are the one aspect of your webinar that's going to be costing money, you want to make sure you're including a tracked URL code so that when at the end of your webinar, people ask, "Hey, was that budget worth it? Or do you need an increase in budget?" You can look back, see how many people registered from Facebook or LinkedIn and say, "Yes, I do need more of a budget because look how many people registered through these platforms." Organic social is where you can really have fun and test new strategies out. Creating a Facebook event 4 weeks prior to your webinar is a great practice that will show up on your Facebook page and always be there. You want to be posting weekly about your webinar, but you don't want to be posting the same thing over and over again every week. So split up your content. Say 1 week introduce your webinar, the next week have a video on a presenter talking about your webinar. So make those posts interesting, engaging, and really hitting home and hitting to the point of what your webinar is supposed to be about. Instagram stories is a great way to engage and have fun. So that's a great one where you can use your presenters to give a couple of tips that they're going to be talking about during the webinar. You can also use Facebook or LinkedIn Live, have a presenter go live for 10 minutes and give a brief introduction to the topic that they'll be mainly discussing during the webinar. Websites are also a great place to promote your webinar, and you can use this on your own website. So putting a pop-up banner on your homepage, putting CTAs on your homepage, and also putting pop-up ads on relevant blog posts are all great strategies to use to get people to register. If people are reading a blog post about your topic, they're most likely interested in learning more about it. So that's why we have that strategy there, and ads and relevant blog posts. Like I said before, your sales team is your ally. So make them your ally with webinars. You can use them to reach out to prospects that they're already in communication with, and you want to make it easy for them. So what I like to do is create a PDF invite for them to use. This invite, it has a date and time, it has a little bit more information about what the webinar is going to be about, and it has how to register. If you want to include this PDF invite in the overview document that I mentioned earlier, it's a great strategy for you to use. Give your sales reps example social copy that they can just copy and paste over to their own social networks, because I promise you, your team has more of a network than you do. So you want to make sure that they're posting, they're excited about the webinar, and that's on the marketing team to really make them excited about the webinars. And also you can schedule dedicated times for sales to call, like call blitzes. You can just do this for a half hour a day, book some time on their calendar, and they can just call 10 people in a day and invite them to the webinar. So your promotion strategy, it needs to be cross-channel, and you need to make sure that you go into your promotion with a plan in mind. So outline your goals and check to see if you're hitting them. This is really important with paid social because, like I said, it's one of the things you're putting money behind. So with paid social, go in and check every couple of days. Are people clicking on my ad? Are people doing what I want them to with my ad? If they're not, it's time to go back and change something. So you need to, be aware of that. Don't be afraid to use your sales and team to promote your webinar. You all work for the same company. You have the same goals in mind. Work together with them and don't be afraid to do that. So like I said, change images or social if paid isn't working. This also resonates for emails. If you have an email subject line that really just isn't getting any open rates, you want to make sure that you have no other similar subject lines in the emails that you're about to be putting out. You also want to make sure that the title and your landing page clearly explain what your webinar is going to be talking about and that it's engaging and exciting for people to learn about. Now let's go into the webinar day. So this is a strategy to get your attendees engaged throughout your entire webinar. Human attention span is 12 seconds. So that means from me starting my presentation, you guys have probably looked at your phone, checked your email, done anything else because your attention span is only 12 seconds. And having a 45-minute webinar is a long time for people's attentions to be purely on your webinar. So how do you make sure that during the majority of your webinar, their attention's focused on you? You engage with them and you interact with them. So you need to coach your presenters on how to present themselves on camera. You want to make sure that their energy is up, that they're excited. I said at the beginning, I'm excited to be talking with you guys today. And I hope that you can feel that I'm excited to be talking with you guys today. And I can tell that you do because of the engagement in the chat box. So you want to make sure that their other webinar presenters are acting like that. You want to do at least 2 dry runs and you want to be full out. Kate and I did 2 dry runs before this and I was all out, all energy. So you want to make sure that no matter who your presenters are, that they're taking that time to go all out during those dry runs because practice makes perfect. And you want to introduce the chat box and QA box early. I asked you guys right at the beginning what your demand gen strategy was. Introducing you guys to the chat box and getting you engaged in me right away. This is something that you want to do throughout your webinar. So these are the top 5 ways to engage your attendees. So number 1, create a hashtag for your webinar. Have fun with it. Put that hashtag at the bottom of all of your slides, as well as your Twitter handle for your company. So you can see at the bottom of our slides, we have Let's Get Social, Ask Us Questions, and our Twitter handle. So feel free, go there, talk with us. 2, high energy from your presenters and hosts. I can promise you, I'll be tired after this webinar because my energy is high. I'm engaging with you guys, I'm interacting, I'm having so much fun talking with you and hearing with you. Number 3, direct your attendees to the chat box and write responses and questions to things being said. You all are interacting with me and I'm recognizing that interaction. That's important to do with your attendees. If they are participating with you, participate with them back. Everyone likes to be recognized. That's why it comes to 4, real-time answers. If this doesn't mean that you should stop mid-sentence to answer a question, it does mean that when you get to the end of a point, if a question has popped up in the chat and you need to answer that, then answer that at the end of a point. Just engage or have whoever is your host and moderating the chat box, tell that person, that's a great question. Thank you so much. We'll get to that at the end. Just make sure you give them some type of response. Number 5, you want to present a closing poll with an offer. So you should present this about 3 to 5 minutes before you end the webinar. And you want to make sure that this poll, you introduce it to your attendees. So a great example is, are you interested in a free consultation with one-on-one with our experts? This is something that's valuable for your company and valuable for the attendees. And that's something you want to keep in mind when creating those polls. Make sure it's valuable for both sides. I am going to harp on using the chat box because I have done that with you all, and it is that important. Why is it that important? You might ask. You might say, can we just stop talking about that? No, because it creates a more personal and conversational connection with your attendees. We live in a virtual world. The biggest difference from events that are live in person to webinars is being able to have this human interaction, this human connection. Now in the virtual world, this is our human connection. Seeing people, talking to people over Zoom and video, this is our new normal. So it's important that even though we're not side by side talking, we're not in a room talking, that you're still engaging with whoever is listening to you. It's extremely valuable. And once your attendees feel connected to you, they're more likely to want to talk with your business about what you do. They're more trusting of you because you're the expert and you're listening to them, you're hearing them, you're engaging and interacting with them. So use the chat box. Now, you had the webinar, did a great job, got a lot of results on the closing poll. What's next? First, we're going to talk about internal webinar next steps, and this is making sure that everyone at your company, everyone on your team is aligned on what to do next. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is break down the attendee no-shows. I can guarantee you that after you host a webinar, you'll be getting pings from people at your company saying, hey, did this client attend? Or, hey, I invited this prospect, did they attend? It is 100% okay to message and say, I am working on splitting up this list. I will get back to you in 2 hours with everything that you need to have for post-webinar. So it's okay. Turn off your notifications on Slack, turn them off on Google Chats, focus on getting that attendee no-show breakdown into your CRM and your marketing automation system. You're also going to want to download the video recording. See if there needs to be any editing. Sometimes there's some space at the beginning of the webinar that needs to be cut out, or at the end of the webinar that needs to be cut out. So you want to edit that. And if you have time, you want to analyze which channels attendees came from. So did your paid social work? Did a lot of people who actually attended come from your paid social? Or was it email? Were the emails that people were receiving and signing up through email the main driver of who attended your webinar? So this is a nice to have the day of your webinar, but a must have for the following day of your webinar. And then you want to have your sales enablement guide. So now we're going to talk about that. A sales enablement guide is really, I've said it before, you want to make it easy for your sales team to understand what you are talking about in a webinar because you guys are a team. Marketing, you guys just put on a great, amazing webinar. Now, kick it over to the sales team to follow up on these great, amazing leads. So this guide covers the main points about what you discussed during the webinar, anything that you gave your attendees that would be significant. It includes a webinar recording link because if people aren't able to attend the live webinar, it's important that they watch the webinar before speaking with leads that came in from the webinar. And then you want to dive a little bit deeper. Go into, okay, here's what we talked about during the webinar, and here are the products that our company sells that relates to what we discussed. So lay that all out for them, give them everything they need, include a link to any CRM campaigns on this one sheet. And also, I'm sure you guys will have unanswered questions from attendees from the webinar that you just weren't able to get to in the hour that you host a webinar. So send those over to the sales team to follow up on. Now, external next steps are equally as important to internal, and you need to make sure that your leads are on the path to closing and interacting with your business. But first, another question. How do you judge if you guys have done a good job on something? So what do you do if you're like, just finished something, and then how do you know if that worked or didn't work? Okay, so let's see some answers coming in. Compliments, feedback, compliments, surveys. Okay, so that is all data, and that is something that you need to get post-webinar from your attendees and your no-shows. So you do that with sending day after emails. You can send 2 emails right after your webinar. Email 1, this will include the key learning workbook that you'll create for your attendees and your no-shows. I will talk about that in the next slide. You want to include the recording and the slide deck for people to view. In email 2, this should go out 2 days post webinar, and this should have a survey because you want to get their feedback. For the attendees, the survey talks about, okay, did we hit the nail on the head with what we talked about during the webinar? Did we answer your questions? Was it what you were expecting to learn about? And for the no-shows, are you still interested in learning about this topic? What prevented you from getting to the webinar? Was it timing? Was it something came up? Were you just not really that interested in it? Were you confused about how to get into the webinar? So you want to get all those feedback. Then you want to create the day after workbook for your attendees and your no-shows. So this workbook, 45 minutes is a long time to be listening and learning. So you want to break down what people should remember from your webinar. And you want to break it down with like the very key aspects. Like if I was to leave this webinar, I want you guys to remember 5 things. That is what you should be putting in these key learning workbooks. And you also want to be putting the webinar recording in these key learning workbooks because you want to make sure that everything is in one nice package for people to download and view. You want to go a step further also with this key learning workbook. Now that your attendees and your no-shows that they watch the recording have learned about what you're talking about, how do you expect them to use this? What are the next steps for them? Answer those questions before they ask you it, because that's providing great value to them. So I like to give them a checklist. Okay, by this time next week, if you guys were listening to this webinar, I would hope that you would figure out a webinar platform for you if you haven't done so already. So that's on the checklist in the time frame. That's the type of stuff you want to be providing to your attendees. Now, I also mentioned you send this to your no-shows. And you send them to your no-shows because they signed up, they're a warm lead. You still want to interact with them. But because they didn't spend 60 minutes with you, they didn't commit that time with you, you want to put a gate on this key learning workbook where they can enter new information. So obviously name and email to get the download sent to them, but you want to ask them a question specifically relating to your webinar. So gate it for our no-shows, don't gate it for attendees, and send this out the day after your webinar. Also with post-event, post-webinar stuff, you need to create a nurture campaign. I mentioned it with the timeline that there's a lot more that goes into a webinar than just a day after. A nurture campaign allows you to be in contact with these leads that you worked really hard to get and that you spent 60 minutes with. So I think that 4 emails is a great number for your nurture campaigns with webinars over the course of 6 weeks. So your email number 1, it should be checking in to see, hey, I gave you this key learning workbook. I gave you a checklist. How are you doing with completing that checklist? Have you checked off the stuff that you're supposed to? Do you have questions? Let us know. Email 2, send this out 2 weeks post-webinar. A great topic to send this out with is a blog relating to your webinar. So give them more content about what they were curious about originally. Email 3, send this out 4 weeks post-webinar. If you guys have a webinar that is pre-recorded and relates to the live webinar that you did, send that into this email. It's a great tool. It's great just giving them the knowledge to expand their business and want to work with you. And email number 4, send them a relevant blog post along with, hey, are you still interested from hearing or talking with us? Now, one important thing to remember with these nurture campaigns is that your sales reps should be aware of this campaign happening for 2 reasons. 1, if they are actively talking to somebody that came in through the webinar, you want to make sure that they're clicking and removing them from the nurture campaign, because we don't want an attendee, a lead, a prospect to be bombarded by your company. You don't want them to receive a call from a sales rep, an email from marketing in the same day. You want to make sure that if they're talking to a sales rep, they're removed from the nurture campaign. And you want to let your sales reps know about this campaign. The second reason of if there's a new lead that says during this nurture campaign, I really love this new webinar that you just shared with me. I want to talk to somebody right now. Your sales team needs to be aware that this might happen and what's the plan going into it. So let your sales team know about that nurture campaign in your kickoff calls, or do a post-event call with them. And finally, you want to make sure that you're creating gated content. A webinar is amazing because you can reuse it. You can gate it on your website, especially if you're hosting a lot of webinars. It's a good best practice to have a page on your website solely dedicated for gated webinars, so people know where to go on your website to see if there's any webinars that are interesting to them. So make sure you gate your website and put them up on, gate your webinar and put them up on your website. You can also use this gated webinar to run email campaigns for prospects or for people that are interested in the product that, using that segmented list to target them the right way. And you can also run social media campaigns with the recording. So your webinar is not just a one-off deal. You can reuse it for almost like 5 or 6 months after the webinar has happened. Obviously, we live in a world that information is changing rapidly, so you want to make sure the webinar is up to date, but a webinar doesn't become not valuable right after you present it. So gate your content, put it up on your website, put it in campaigns, and create a strategy that revolves around that gated piece of content. So to wrap things up, plan ahead for your webinars. You want to go into your webinar with a detailed plan. So that includes pre-promotion plan, promotion plan, day of webinar plan, and post-webinar plan. I promise you that if you have a full drawn out and laid out plan, it will make your life easier and simpler and your webinar better for everyone involved. Number 2, involve your company with your promotion. Get your company excited just like you're getting your attendees and registrants excited. You want your company to be on board and stand behind you when you're hosting your webinars. And you do that by hosting those kickoff calls. You want to make sure that you're creating a strategy for a cross-channel promotion. Depending on your audience, sometimes they're just not checking their emails, and that's not the best place to reach them. So social as another option is great. So make sure that you're creating that really robust cross-channel promotion to target everyone that you can for your right audience. And make it easy for people to register and join your webinar. User experience in today's world is extremely important. I don't know about you, but if a web page is loading for longer than maybe even 5 seconds, I X out of it. Same with your webinar. If you are making it too hard for people to join and it's too complicated to understand how they get on your webinar, they're just going to go to another one. And there are webinars that are going to be around your same topic that might be making it easier for them to join. So make sure that user experience is great and you're putting in those 3 reminder emails. Engage your attendees during your webinar. You want to interact with them, form a human connection with them, make them trust you, make them want to talk to you afterwards. So engage them through chat, through answering their questions in live, to polling, to going on Twitter and seeing who's using the hashtag. So making sure that you're engaging them throughout. Timely follow-up is really important. People forget about things quickly nowadays, and you want to make sure that your webinar is staying top of mind, and you do that with timely follow-up. So you do that with a day after email with recording, and you do that with, doing a second email with a survey. You also want to let people know that this information is coming to them. So a great principle is doing next steps at the end of your webinar. Okay, thank you for listening to me, and next steps are you'll be receiving a recording in your inbox tomorrow. So set expectations for them. use your webinar as lead generation. This is why webinars are made, because it is a great demand gen strategy for new leads for your company. It gets the word out, your brand awareness goes up, your trustability goes up. So you really want to make sure that you're using your webinars to drive leads, and you're setting expectations with your company that these webinars are going to drive leads. And that will help with getting everyone on board with supporting webinars. So, do we have any questions? You guys can just put them in the chat.
All right, Devin, there's a couple of questions coming through. Looks like Meredith asked a question about, can you elaborate on email segmenting? What if you don't have a large contact list to segment?
That is a great question, Meredith. So if you don't have a super robust list, it's fine to send one email to everybody. Or maybe you just have a big enough list to segment into prospects and clients. So that's fine. You can definitely just segment twice. You don't need to include every single one of those 4 buckets, but you want to make sure that the content you're putting in your email is going to relate to the people you're sending it to. So that's why segmentation is a very valuable tool. But if you have a smaller list and doesn't really make sense for you to segment, again, that's fine. I would advise on keeping prospects and clients separate, because those are 2 different people for your business, and those are 2 different people that you're going to talk to completely different ways.
Next, you talked a lot about social promotion. Casey's asking, what if you don't have a budget for paid social ads?
Yep. So Casey, that's a great question. And with the economy as it is, some people just don't have the budget to do paid social ads. And that's fine. It's not the best strategy, but it's certainly not the worst. You can just really amp up your organic social traffic and make sure that your emails are really extra grabbing people's attention. And this is someplace that if you don't have a budget for paid social, you want to rely a little bit more heavily on your sales team. So, I said at the beginning, setting expectations with your sales team, maybe you expecting them to invite one prospect to your webinar and have them attend. So in a situation where you don't have a budget for paid social, you want to make sure that your sales reps are helping you out there, and maybe increase that expectation to each sales rep has 2 prospects who have attended the webinar. So work around that, work with your budget, and just make sure that if your budget can go to a webinar platform, that is better than a paid social campaign.
All right. Mike asked, what do you do if you have a small team and you can't have 4 people involved in the webinar process?
Great question, Mike. And we're doing an example of it right now. Right now, Kate and I are a small team, so it didn't make sense for her to have 2 speakers and a host. So what you do with that is you really just adjust. You figure out, okay, it's not realistic for me to have 4 people in this webinar process, and adjust accordingly. So with Kate and I, we just did 1 speaker, 1 host. And although we have our New Perspective Twitter handle at the bottom, we didn't create a hashtag because no one would be able to monitor that. So make sure that you're doing what makes sense for your company. And if your company's resources aren't there, that's fine. Just make sure that whoever is presenting is confident that they're going to be speaking for about 30 to 45 minutes.
All right. So Jason asked, is it best practice to build a content plan together that aligns with your webinars?
Yes, Jason, it is best practice to build a content plan with blogs, ebooks, webinars, all wrapped up together, because I mentioned that nurture campaign, how you want to have, and website advertising, how you want to have a blog that is relevant to your webinar. So you want to get with your content team and plan out your content strategy completely. So what blogs are we going to be putting out this quarter? What webinars are we going to be putting out this quarter? What's the social feel we're going to be putting out this quarter? So get with your content team before the quarter starts. Make sure that you guys have a really well-planned strategy going into the quarter, And this will also help you stick to a timeline and make sure you have enough resources and enough prep time to get a webinar done efficiently.
Awesome. All right. So Jim asked, should your sales reps be following up with the no-shows as well?
Great question, Jim. Yes, those no-shows are still very warm leads. I'm sure things pop up daily in your all lives. I know they do in mine. So just because somebody isn't able to attend the live webinar doesn't mean they're no longer interested. They're interested because they signed up for the webinar. So make sure that the sales team is following up with those no-shows, especially if those no-shows download the gated content that you send them. So it is best practice that the sales team follows up with both attendees and no-shows. You'll be putting all that information into the CRM system so they have enough information to go off of and follow up on every single lead.
Great. So Haley says, you're saying the ideal timeline is 6 weeks. So does that mean that all of your webinars should be 6 weeks apart, or can you start planning while you're still promoting your other webinar?
Great question, Haley. And you can start planning your webinar while you are still promoting your other webinar. 6 weeks is the ideal timeline, but remember, promotion doesn't start until about 4 weeks out. So I wouldn't actively promote another webinar while you're promoting your first one. I would take that 2 weeks of planning time you can definitely do while you're actively promoting another webinar. So you can do a webinar each month. That's a very, very realistic, as long as you have the capacity to be planning for those 2 weeks that you're in promotion for your first webinar.
Okay, so next we have Dylan says, do you suggest having different social graphics created for the ones you give to your team versus the ones that you're posting on your business's social platform?
Great question, Dylan. I do suggest having a little bit of different social graphics for your team members and for your company. And the reason I say this is because people who are connected with your employees on LinkedIn might also be connected with your company. So you want to make sure that there's a little bit of differences between what your employees are posting and what your business is posting. And a lot of that also has to do with brand personality. Your employees' posts and your employees' graphics can be a little bit more personal to them. So a great example of this would be for the social graphic that you give your employees. Have a picture of the presenters and don't use that picture for when you're posting that graphic on your business's page. You definitely want to make sure that you're switching it up a little bit and people don't see the same post and the same graphic over and over and over again. So make sure that you are just making some small adjustments in the graphics.
Okay, great. It actually looks like there aren't any more questions at this time.
Thank you guys so much for participating. And if you do have any questions, you feel free to visit us online today at New Perspective site. Here it is. And your next steps for today is keep an eye out for your key learning workbook. Ask us any questions that you have on social. We'll respond. And like I said, if you still have questions, we would love to talk to you and love to discuss webinars and webinar strategy and marketing strategy with you and your business. So book a free appointment and talk with us and talk with me. So it was so amazing talking with you all today. I hope that you came away from this with a couple of key takeaways that you'll be learning about in that workbook. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you for being an amazing audience and being so engaging throughout the webinar. Have a great rest of your day, guys.